"Dad, where is everyone?" asked the funeral director, his eyes nervously scanning the empty rows of chairs in the chapel. I stood beside my mother Margaret's coffin, watching the cold December wind blow the open curtains. 3:50 in the afternoon. The exact time she had requested. Punctuality had always been sacred to her. "They're not coming," I replied, adjusting the black tie she had given me last Christmas. "You can begin." "My name is Andrew, I'm 57 years old, and I've just discovered that I'm an orphan in every sense of the word. Not only because I lost my mother 3 days ago after a courageous battle with cancer, but because my own children decided that a resort in Cancun was more important than saying goodbye to the grandmother who raised them." The pastor cleared his throat, leafing through his notes with obvious discomfort. In his 45-year ministerial career, he had never officiated a funeral with only one person in the congregation. The flowers I had chosen seemed ridiculously abundant for such an empty space. White roses, her favorites, now silent witnesses to the greatest humiliation of my life. My mother had been a teacher for 38 years. She taught half the children in this town to read. She organized charity bazaars, cared for elderly neighbors, never missed a school recital of her grandchildren. And when the diagnosis came, she faced each chemotherapy session with the same determination she used to correct tests late into the night. "Let's start with hymn 121, announced the pastor, his voice echoing in the empty space. As the instrumental music played, I reached for my phone. Maybe they had sent some explanation. Maybe the flight had been cancelled. Maybe there was an emergency that justified it. The first notification I saw was from Instagram. My oldest son, Brian, had posted a photo 45 minutes ago. He and his wife Jennifer were in swimsuits, colorful drinks in hand, smiling broadly in an infinity pool overlooking the ocean. The caption read, "Life is too short not to enjoy every moment. Cancun is amazing." My daughter Catherine had commented on the photo, "So jealous of you guys. Pool day here too. That margarita is divine." Pool day. On their grandmother's funeral day. I kept scrolling. Catherine had posted her own series of stories. She and her husband David at a spa, then at the beach, then dining at a fancy restaurant. All time-stamped within the last 6 hours. All while I was choosing the right words for the eulogy of the woman who loved them unconditionally. "Mr. Andrew," the pastor called me gently. "Would you like to say a few words about your mother?" I got up, putting my phone in my pocket. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened next completely changed the course of my life. I walked up to the pulpit, looked at the empty chairs where my children should have been, and began to speak. But as I praised my mother's generosity and unconditional love, an idea began to form in my mind. An idea that she, in all her wisdom, would probably approve of. Because if they thought they could disrespect her memory like that, they were about to find out that her son had inherited more than just her admirable qualities. During the eulogy, my voice remained steady as I recounted my mother's 63 years of life. How she had worked 2 jobs to raise me alone after my father abandoned us. How she saved penny by penny to pay for my engineering degree. How she turned our small house into a safe haven for any child in the neighborhood who needed a plate of food or help with homework. But as I spoke, my mind was divided. One part recalled the beautiful memories I shared with the empty walls. The other part coldly processed the betrayal I had discovered on her cell phone. After the pastor finished his prayers and the cemetery workers began to lower the coffin, I stood there. The biting December wind made my eyes sting, but it wasn't tears of mourning I was holding back. It was a cold, calculated anger that grew with every passing second. I opened Instagram again. The posts kept coming. Brian had added 3 more stories since the funeral began. A selfie of him and Jennifer at the resort spa, captioned, "Total Relaxation Day." A video of the two laughing during a dance class on the beach. And the most recent, him toasting with a glass of champagne, saying to the camera, "Life is meant to be lived intensely, folks." My daughter Catherine was not far behind. She had posted a 15-minute video giving a tour of the presidential suite where she was staying. It showed the hot tub, the panoramic ocean view, the 5-star room service. "Girls, you won't believe how luxurious this place is. David surprised me with this incredible trip. The only thing missing is you here." What shocked me most was not just their absence. It was the naturalness, the genuine joy with which they celebrated while I buried the woman who had loved them more than life itself. I remembered perfectly the last conversation I had with each of them. Brian had called me the week before. "Dad, you know I'd love to be there, but this trip to Cancun has been planned for months. Jennifer planned everything as a wedding anniversary surprise. It would be impossible to cancel now. Besides, Grandma will understand. She's always been understanding." Understanding. My mother, who had spent the last 6 weeks in the hospital, asking every day when her grandchildren would come to visit her. Who had held my hand the night before she died, whispering, "Will Brian and Catherine make it in time to say goodbye?" Catherine had been even more direct when I called her 3 days ago, a few hours after my mother passed away. "Dad, I'm really sorry about Grandma, but you know how anxious I get about funerals and cemeteries. David has already paid for this trip. It's $15,000 that will go down the drain if we cancel now. Grandma wouldn't want us to throw money away, would she? She was always so thrifty." $15,000. More than my mother earned in an entire year working as a substitute teacher. As I walked back to the car, a specific memory hit me like a punch in the stomach. Christmas 2 years ago, when my mother had given Brian and Catherine the last $5,000 from her savings account. "To help with the down payment on the new house," she had told Brian. "So you can give the boys a better life." Catherine had used the money for plastic surgery. Brian had bought a sports car. Neither of them had thanked her properly. In fact, Brian had complained afterward that $5,000 didn't really help much with real estate prices. I got to my car and sat there for a moment in silence. I picked up my phone again and went to my contacts. There were dozens of condolence messages from neighbors, my mother's former students, co-workers. People who barely knew her, but who made a point of sending flowers, offering help, sharing fond memories. But from my own children? Nothing but that cold text from Brian on the morning of the funeral. That's when an idea began to form in my mind. An idea that my mother, with all her wisdom about justice and consequences, would probably have approved of. Because if they thought they could disrespect her memory like that, completely ignore the woman who had raised them with so much love and dedication, then maybe it was time for them to learn a lesson about family that they apparently had never understood. And I had just the right tool to teach them that lesson. The afternoon after the funeral, I was at my mother's house organizing her belongings when my phone rang. It was Brian. "Dad, I hope you're doing well." His voice sounded too casual, as if he were calling to ask about the weather. "Listen, I'm here at the resort thinking, when do you think we'll be able to settle the inheritance? Jen and I have our eye on a bigger house, and you know how the market is here in Denver." The inheritance issue. He hadn't even waited 24 hours since we buried my mother. "Brian, we haven't even processed the will yet. Your grandmother was buried yesterday." "I know, Dad, and I'm sorry about that. But life goes on, right? And frankly, Grandma always wanted us to seize opportunities. She'd be happy knowing we're investing in the family's future." Investing in the family's future. The same family that didn't attend the matriarch's funeral. "Besides," he continued, "Catherine and I talked, and we think it would be best to sell Grandma's house quickly. The real estate market is booming, and it doesn't make sense to leave the money sitting there when we can multiply that investment." Sell the house. The house where my mother had lived for 42 years. The house where she had raised me, where Brian and Catherine had spent every Christmas of their childhood, where she had taught them to bake cookies and ride bikes in the backyard. "Dad? Are you listening to me?" "I'm listening, Brian." "Great. So when you get home, can we meet with a realtor? Catherine has already researched some names. There's a guy who specializes in quick sales who can appraise everything this week." I hung up without answering. An hour later, Catherine called. "Dad, Brian told me you talked about the house. I'm glad we're on the same page." Her voice had that excited tone she used when talking about shopping. "David found a lawyer who specializes in estates and can speed up the whole process. Apparently, if there are no disputes among the heirs, we can settle everything in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. My mother's grave was still fresh. "Catherine, I haven't even been to her office to look at the documents yet." "Oh, about that. I've already looked into it, and you don't really need all that organization. The lawyer said it's usually just the house, car, and bank account. Nothing too complicated. The important thing is not to let the process drag on, because then the taxes start to get complicated." Taxes. She was worrying about taxes before she even knew exactly what the inheritance was. Listen, Dad, I know it may seem premature, but David and I did some basic calculations. If we divide everything by 3, each of us should get about 100,000, 120 at most. For us here in Miami, that would be perfect for the down payment on an apartment we're looking at in Brickell. Bayview, 3 bedrooms, gym. 100,000, 120 at most. She was calculating the value of her own grandmother's life as if it were a business transaction. Catherine, how did you come up with that estimate? Come on, Dad, it's not rocket science. Grandma's house is worth about 250,000 at most. It's a simple neighborhood. Her car isn't worth much, it's that old Honda. And Grandma was always frugal, so her bank account probably doesn't have much more than 50 or 60,000. Frugal. My mother had been frugal, because she spent every extra penny helping her children and grandchildren. She had paid for Brian's entire college education. She had given Catherine $15,000 when she got married. She had bought each grandchild their first car. She had been thrifty with herself in order to be generous to all of us. Besides, Catherine continued, there's no point in getting sentimental. Grandma always said that money sitting around is money lost. She would be proud to know that we are being practical. Practical. The word they used to justify anything they wanted to do. When I hung up the phone, I walked to my mother's office. It was a small room at the back of the house, with a wooden desk that had belonged to my grandfather. The walls were covered with photos: Brian's engineering graduation, Catherine's wedding, the grandchildren's birthdays, my own graduation 30 years ago. I opened the top drawer of the desk. Inside was a neatly organized folder labeled "Will and Important Documents" in my mother's careful handwriting. What I found inside that folder made my blood run cold. My mother didn't have only $250,000 in assets, as Catherine had estimated. The house, which she had paid off long ago and maintained impeccably, was valued at $450,000 in the last appraisal. The old Honda was actually a model from 3 years ago, purchased with cash and still valued at $28,000. But what really shocked me was the bank account. My mother had saved, invested, and scrimped for decades. $380,000 in CDs and savings accounts. Another $240,000 in a conservative investment fund she had maintained for 15 years. All told, the total inheritance was over $1,100,000. $1,100,000 that Brian and Catherine were counting the days to divide, without even saying a proper goodbye to her. I continued reading the documents. There was a letter attached to the will, with my handwriting on the outside, to Andrew, open only after my death. Inside, my mother's careful handwriting. My dear Andrew, if you are reading this, it is because my time has come. I want you to know that every penny I saved was with the intention of providing security and opportunities for our family. But I also want you to use your wisdom to decide who truly deserves this gift that I worked so hard to build. The money should go to those who understand that family is more than convenience. I trust your judgment completely. With all my love, Mom. I sat in her chair for a long time, holding the letter. Outside, I could hear the noise of the street, children coming home from school, normal life continuing while my world had changed completely. It was at that moment, sitting in the chair where my mother had written hundreds of letters of recommendation for former students, that I made a decision that would change everything. If Brian and Catherine thought they could treat my mother's memory like a business transaction, if they truly believed that family was only about inheritance and convenience, then they were about to learn a very valuable lesson about consequences. And I had just the right tools to teach that lesson. The next morning, I woke up early and went straight to the office of Harold Brennan, the lawyer who had handled my mother's legal affairs for the past 20 years. Harold was a 70-year-old man with gray hair and reading glasses that were always hanging around his neck. He had known my mother since she bought the house, and I knew I could trust him. "Andrew, my condolences," he said, shaking my hand with genuine warmth. "Margaret was an extraordinary woman. How can I help you today?" I laid all the documents on his desk. "Harold, I need to understand exactly what my options are here." He put on his glasses and began to carefully examine each document. After 15 minutes of silence, he leaned back in his chair and looked directly at me. "Well, Andrew, your mother was very clever in how she structured this. Technically, she left you as the principal executor and majority beneficiary. The letter she attached isn't just sentimental, it has legal weight. You have complete discretion to determine how the assets will be distributed among the heirs." Does that mean I can? It means you can do pretty much anything you deem appropriate, as long as you document your reasons. If you decide that certain heirs don't deserve to receive anything, you have that authority. If you want to donate everything to charity, you can do that too. I felt a mixture of relief and determination growing in my chest. Harold, I want you to prepare a new distribution of the assets. And I want it to be absolutely irrefutable from a legal standpoint. As we discussed the technical details, my phone rang. It was Catherine again. Dad, David found a construction company that can demolish Grandma's house and build 2 townhouses on the land. The return on investment would be incredible. We can triple the value of the property. Demolish the house. The house where my mother had planted roses with her own hands. The house where she had taught Brian and Catherine to bake cookies on Sunday afternoons. Catherine, we're still organizing the paperwork. Dad, honestly, you're being too slow with this. Brian and I have talked it over, and we've decided that we're going to take the lead on this. You can stay on as the nominal executor, but leave the practical stuff to us. We're younger, we understand the current market better. Younger. As if age were synonymous with wisdom or character. David already has contacts at law firms who can speed up the entire inventory. For a small extra fee, we can get everything done in 3 weeks instead of 2 months. A small extra fee. They were so eager to get their hands on the money that they were willing to pay a bribe to speed up the legal process. Besides Dad, Brian had a brilliant idea. Since Grandma was always so concerned about education, we could use some of the money to set up a foundation in her name. Of course, the 3 of us would be the administrators, so we'd get salaries from the foundation too. It's a way to honor her memory and still have a regular income. An educational foundation. They wanted to turn my mother's inheritance into their own lifetime salaries. Catherine, I'm going to need a few more days to review everything. A few days? Dad, honestly, it seems like you don't want to help us honor Grandma in the best way possible. Honor Grandma. The same people who posted photos of drinks on Instagram during her funeral. After I hung up, Harold shook his head slowly. Andrew, in my 40-year career, I've seen many families destroy themselves over inheritance. But I've rarely seen such a blatant lack of decency. That's exactly why I want to do what I'm going to do, Harold. We spent the next 2 hours structuring a completely different plan. Harold explained every legal aspect to me, every way to protect the decision from possible future challenges. Are you sure about this, Andrew? Once we sign these documents, there's no turning back. I'm absolutely sure. That afternoon, I decided to do one last check before finalizing everything. I opened my kid's Instagram again. Brian had posted a 45-second video showing the entire resort. Guys, look at this amazing place. Jennifer and I are living like royalty here in Cancun. All-inclusive resort, spa, private tennis court. Life is meant to be enjoyed. In the comments, someone had asked, "What about your grandmother's funeral?" Brian's response, "Life goes on, right? Grandma was always the first to say that we shouldn't stop living because of death. She would be happy to know that we are enjoying every moment." Catherine had commented on the post, "I envy you guys. But here in Miami isn't so bad either. David took me to an amazing spa today. Hot stone massage, gold facial. I felt like a princess." Hot stone massage. The day after my grandmother's funeral. That's when I made my final decision. If you're following this story and getting angry at their attitude, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what happened next was the most satisfying turnaround you've ever seen. I called Harold. "Harold, finalize all the documents. We're going to do exactly as we planned." "Are you sure, Andrew?" I've never been more sure of anything in my life. While Harold prepared the final documentation, I began to organize the second part of my plan. It wasn't enough to just change the will. I wanted Brian and Catherine to fully understand the consequences of their choices. I opened my mother's laptop and began compiling a detailed chronology of the last 5 years. Every time they had borrowed money and never paid it back. Every broken promise to visit. Every holiday they canceled at the last minute. Every time my mother had asked about them and I had made up an excuse so as not to hurt her. The list was longer than I had imagined. I also organized all the messages and Instagram posts from the day of the funeral. Screenshots with timestamps showing exactly what they were doing while I carried my mother's coffin alone. Around 8 o'clock that night, I got another call. This time it was Brian, but the tone was completely different. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Jennifer and I are thinking about having another baby. And you know how hard it is to raise children these days. Private education, health insurance, all that stuff. Another baby. The same granddaughter my mother asked about every day in the hospital, but whom they never took to visit her. What I mean is, maybe it would be better if I got a bigger share of the inheritance. After all, I have 2 children to support, and Catherine has none. It would be fairer, don't you think?" Fairer. He wanted to renegotiate the inheritance based on his personal financial needs. "Brian, let's talk about this when you get back from your trip." Actually, Dad, Jennifer, and I have decided to extend the trip for another week. We found an incredible package deal for Tulum. It would be silly to waste it. They were going to extend their honeymoon while I organized all of my late mother's affairs on my own. "But don't worry, when we get back, we'll take care of everything quickly. You just need to sign the papers that Catherine's lawyer prepares." Catherine's lawyer. They had already hired legal representation without even consulting me. It was at that moment that I realized I had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. My mother had spent her entire life being too generous to people who mistook generosity for weakness. That confusion was about to come to a very costly end. 3 weeks later, Brian and Catherine finally returned from their extended vacation in the Caribbean. I had spent those 21 days meticulously organizing every detail of the inventory, working side by side with Harold to ensure that everything was absolutely irrefutable. On Monday morning, I received a call from Catherine. Her tone was completely different, anxious, almost desperate. "Dad, I need to see you today. Now." The lawyer I hired tried to access the inventory documents and said there are some irregularities. "What kind of irregularities, Catherine?" He couldn't explain it properly over the phone. He said we need to talk in person. "Brian is coming too. Can we meet at Grandma's house in an hour?" An hour later, I was sitting in my mother's living room when I heard 2 cars pulling into the garage. Brian came in first, still tan from the Mexican sun, followed by Catherine, who was wearing an expensive dress she had clearly bought during the trip. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Brian got straight to the point, throwing a folder on the coffee table. "My lawyer said there's a problem with the will. That you made changes." "What changes?" Catherine sat on the edge of the sofa, her freshly manicured nails drumming nervously on the armrest. I looked at them both for a long moment. My children. The children my mother had loved more than life itself. The same people who posted photos of drinks while I carried her coffin alone. "I didn't make any changes to your grandmother's will," I replied calmly. "I simply exercised the rights she granted me as principal executor." "What rights?" Brian leaned forward, his voice rising an octave. I opened my own briefcase and pulled out a copy of the letter my mother had left attached to the original will. "Your grandmother gave me complete discretion to determine how the assets would be distributed among the heirs, based on who she believed truly deserved this gift." Catherine snatched the letter from my hands and began to read aloud, her voice trembling. "The money should go to those who understand that family is more than convenience." "That doesn't mean anything legally," Brian protested. "A will is a will. You can't just decide to change everything because you're upset." "Actually, I can." I took another document from the folder. "Harold Brennan, the family lawyer for 20 years, has confirmed that I have full legal authority for this decision. And it has already been made." "So how much do we get?" Catherine asked, her voice sounding strangely high-pitched. "You get nothing." The silence that followed was so deep that I could hear the kitchen clock ticking away the seconds. Catherine was the first to react. "That's impossible. We're the only children. We're the rightful heirs." "You were the heirs," I corrected. "Until you decided that a resort in Cancun was more important than saying goodbye to the woman who raised you." Brian stood up abruptly and began pacing the room. "Dad, this is ridiculous. You're acting on impulse, out of anger. We can contest this in court." "You can try." I took out another set of documents. "But you might want to see this first." It was a folder full of screenshots of all their Instagram posts during the funeral. Every story, every photo, every comment, organized chronologically with precise timestamps. While I was carrying my mother's coffin alone, I began, my voice gaining strength. Brian was posting photos of drinks. While I was choosing flowers she would never see, Catherine was touring the hotel room. While I was holding her hand during her last days in the hospital, you were planning how to spend her inheritance. Catherine tried to grab the documents, but I held them tightly. This is going straight to the judge if you try to contest it. Along with the complete timeline of the last 5 years. Every broken promise, every cancelled visit, every time you borrowed money and never paid it back. Dad, you can't be serious, Catherine whispered. We're her family. Family. I repeated the word slowly. Family shows up at the funeral. Family doesn't calculate the value of the inheritance before the body is even cold. Family doesn't extend their honeymoon while the father sorts out the affairs of the deceased mother all by himself. Brian stopped walking and stared directly at me. So where's the money going? To someone who understands the true meaning of family. It was at that moment that the front door opened and a familiar voice shouted, "Grandpa, I'm home." It was Joshua, my cousin Michael's 16-year-old son. The boy who had visited my mother every weekend during her chemotherapy. Who had read books to her when she was too weak to hold the pages. Who had cried genuinely at the funeral and stayed with me until the end. Joshua will receive the entire inheritance, I announced, watching the shock spread across my children's faces. $1,100,000, which will be managed in a trust until he turns 25. Enough to pay for college, buy a house, start a life. $1,100,000, Catherine stammered. You said it was only $250,000. You said it was $250,000. You were never interested enough to find out the truth. Joshua entered the room, clearly sensing the tension in the air. Sorry, Grandpa, I didn't know anyone was here. I just came to bring back the books great-grandma lent me. They were the books my mother had given him to read during his chemotherapy sessions. The boy had made a point of returning them, even after her death. Actually, Joshua, those books are yours now, along with everything else. Brian and Catherine were in complete shock as I explained to Joshua, in their presence, that he had inherited everything. The house, the money, the investments, even the car. But Grandpa, Joshua said, clearly confused, shouldn't it go to your children? It should go to the person who truly loved my mother, I replied. And you were the only person who was there when she needed it most. Catherine began to cry, but they weren't tears of mourning. They were tears of anger and financial frustration. Dad, you're making a terrible mistake. We're your children. You are my children, I agreed. But you weren't your grandmother's children when she needed you most. And now you'll find out what it means to live with the consequences of your own choices. Brian tried one last gambit. Dad, this will destroy our family forever. I looked at him for a long moment, then at Catherine, who was still crying with anger. Our family was destroyed the moment you decided that a vacation trip was more important than honoring the woman who dedicated her entire life to loving you. The twist they never expected was not just losing their inheritance. It was discovering that, all this time, I had had complete control over their future financial lives, and they hadn't even bothered to find out. The days following the confrontation at my mother's house were revealing in a way I could never have imagined. Brian and Catherine tried every possible strategy to reverse the situation, but their every move only solidified my decision. Brian was the first to try the emotional approach. He showed up at my house 3 days later, unannounced, with red eyes and an expression I hadn't seen since he was a child, and broke something valuable. Dad, please, can we talk like adults? I know we've made mistakes, but we're family. You can't just cut us off like this. Adults, I repeated, watching him fidget with his car keys. Adults show up at their grandmother's funeral. Adults don't extend their honeymoon while their father organizes their deceased mother's affairs alone. Dad, you know I wanted to be there. But the circumstances. The circumstances were that you thought a vacation trip was more important than honoring the woman who raised you. He tried to argue for 40 minutes. He talked about stress at work, about how Jennifer had planned the trip as a surprise, about how they knew Grandma would understand. Every word that came out of his mouth only confirmed that he still didn't understand the magnitude of what he had lost. Catherine arrived 2 hours after Brian left. Her strategy was completely different, and much more revealing of her character. Dad, I talked to a lawyer. He said I can challenge this decision in court. Apparently, there are legal precedents for cases where executors act on emotional impulse. Challenge it in court. She wanted to sue her own father for giving Grandma's inheritance to someone who truly loved her. Catherine, you have every right to try. I don't want to go that far, Dad. But $1,100,000 is not something I can just accept losing. David and I have plans, investments that depend on that money. Plans and investments. The woman who had posted spa photos on Instagram during her grandmother's funeral was telling me about financial plans based on her inheritance. What is the value of your dignity, Catherine? Dignity doesn't pay the bills, Dad. It was at that moment that I fully understood that I had made the right decision. My daughter was willing to sue her own father for money she automatically considered hers, even though she had never shown love or respect for the person who had accumulated that wealth. Then do what you think is necessary, Catherine. But be prepared to see all your posts from the day of the funeral presented as evidence. The color drained from her face when she realized I had documented everything. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Harold. Andrew, they have indeed filed the lawsuit. But I have good news. The judge has reviewed all the documents, including your mother's letter and the evidence you compiled. He wants to speak with you in person before making any decisions. The meeting with Judge Morrison was an experience I will never forget. He was a man in his 60s, with gray hair and an expression that suggested decades of dealing with family disputes. Mr. Holloway, I have carefully reviewed this case. It's rare to see such meticulous documentation. He leafed through the pages containing the Instagram screenshots. May I ask why you documented these posts in such detail? Your Honor, when I realized that my children were celebrating at a resort while I was burying my mother alone, I understood that I would need concrete evidence in case they questioned my decision. And the beneficiary you chose? Joshua. Joshua visited my mother every weekend during her 6 months of chemotherapy. He read books to her when she was too weak to hold the pages. He was the only person in the family who stayed with me until the end at the cemetery. The judge leaned back in his chair, watching me for a long moment. Mr. Holloway, in 28 years on the probate court, I've seen many families destroyed by inheritance. But I've rarely seen a situation where the evidence of family neglect was so clear and at the same time the choice of the new beneficiary was so obviously motivated by genuine love. He denied Brian and Catherine's request. Not only did he deny it, but he made a point of reading aloud some of the Instagram posts during the hearing, creating a public record of why they had lost the inheritance. Catherine left the courtroom in tears. Brian left in absolute silence, without looking in my direction. 3 months later, Joshua graduated from high school with the highest grades in his class. At the graduation party, he gave a speech about the great-grandmother who had inspired him to become a teacher. Margaret Holloway taught me that education isn't just about books and grades. It's about shaping people who make a difference in the world. And I want to use everything she left me to continue that legacy. He used part of the money to pay for a full scholarship to a teaching college. Another part was invested in a fund that would guarantee his stability until he was 25. And with the rest, he created a scholarship in my mother's name for underprivileged children in the neighborhood where she had taught. 6 months after the court decision, Brian called me. His voice sounded different, more humble, less arrogant. Dad, Jennifer and I are getting divorced. Apparently, when the easy money from the inheritance disappeared, Jennifer decided that Brian was no longer so attractive. She had found another man with better financial stability, and was moving to another state. I'm sorry, Brian. Don't be, Dad. I think I needed to learn some lessons about what really matters. It took Catherine longer to accept the new reality. She and David tried a few ventures that failed when they discovered they didn't have the startup capital they had expected from the inheritance. Eventually, she got a job as a manager in a department store, honest work she had never considered before. A year and a half after my mother's death, I received a letter from Catherine. It was short and handwritten. Dad, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I finally understand why you made the decision you did. Working to support my own family has made me realize the value of what Grandma built. And seeing Joshua use the inheritance to honor her memory has shown me the difference between earning something and simply expecting to receive it. I'm not asking for the money back. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I've learned to be the daughter you and Grandma deserved. With love and regret, Catherine. I talked to Joshua about the letter. He, now a sophomore in college with a perfect GPA, gave me advice that sounded exactly like something my mother would say. Grandpa, forgiveness doesn't mean giving the inheritance back. But maybe it means giving them a chance to prove they've really changed. 2 years after my mother's funeral, I organized the first family gathering since that terrible day. Catherine showed up with a simple gift, a handmade frame she had made herself, containing a photo of my mother with Joshua during one of the reading sessions at the hospital. Brian arrived empty-handed, but with something much more valuable, genuine humility. Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me for what I did. But I want you to know that I'm trying to be the man Grandma believed I could be. He had started volunteering at a nursing home, reading to elderly people who had no visitors. I realized that I can honor her memory even without receiving her money. Joshua, now 19 and impressively mature, proposed something that moved me deeply. How about we start a tradition? Every year, on Great-Grandma's birthday, we get together to do something she would approve of. Volunteer work, community service, anything that spreads the kind of love she spread during her lifetime. And that's how our family began to heal. Not through money, but through purpose. Not through material inheritance, but through the moral legacy my mother had left behind. Today, 5 years after that lonely funeral, our annual gathering in memory of my mother brings together 15 people. Joshua brought some college friends. Catherine brought the children she had after learning to value family over convenience. Brian brought his new wife, a retired teacher he met while volunteering. And me? I brought the peace of knowing that I had turned the greatest betrayal of my life into the greatest lesson my family had ever received. If you've made it this far in this story, if it has touched your heart or made you reflect on the true value of family, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We have dozens of stories like this one, where ordinary people found extraordinary strength to turn injustice into justice, betrayal into wisdom, and pain into purpose. The last time I visited my mother's grave, I took Joshua with me. He placed fresh flowers on a headstone and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that family isn't about blood, but about love." As we walked back to the car, he asked me, "Grandpa, do you think she would approve of what we did?" I looked at the 22-year-old who had become a dedicated teacher, who used my mother's legacy to educate underprivileged children, who had helped our family reunite through example rather than obligation. "Joshua," I replied, "I'm sure she's smiling." And for the first time since that empty funeral, so was I.